What's the difference between the Fed and the Treasury Department? Which one can create money out of thin air? Which one can't? How does it work? Check this out, this conversation with Professor Richard Wolff. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Professor Wolff, the Fed has created money. I mentioned the other day that the Fed had created $7 trillion and used it to buy corporate bonds and stock, which the Fed had never done before. And somebody on Twitter said, "What? Where'd you get that? How? That sounds crazy." So anyhow, there's that assertion that the Fed is just like basically creating money out of thin air and using it to prop up corporate America in the stock market. The Treasury Department provides taxpayer money that gets appropriated by Congress that by and large bails out average working people, like the CARES Act that gave everybody $600 a week until it ran out a few months ago. Back in July, I think it ran out. And so can you explain to everybody, I think people are very confused by this. What's the difference between the Fed and the money that they create and the Treasury Department or the Treasury of the United States and the money that Congress appropriates and spends? And why doesn't the Fed help average working people? And why does Congress and the Treasury Department, why is that their only, they're the only place where average working people can get any kind of benefit? Am I making sense of this question?
Sure. The first thing is to understand the difference between them. What the Treasury can spend is money that only comes from one or the other of two sources. The Treasury spends either the money raised in taxes or the money borrowed from the public when it spends more than it takes in taxes. So the Treasury cannot create money. It can only spend money it has either received as taxes or borrowed. The Federal Reserve, our central bank, is not limited in that way. They basically can create pretty much as much money as they want. It used to be by printing it. Now it is more done by electronic means, which simply means that they can create a bank balance for whoever they want to lend money to, or, as you put it, if they go out and buy paper that's in the market, bonds issued by companies, bonds issued by the United States Treasury, when it borrows, well, then they can use simply created money out of nothing with which to buy those bonds. So then here's the link. When the Treasury borrows to be able to spend more than it takes in taxes, it issues a bond, an IOU, to whoever it borrows from. That person or bank or corporation that has lent money to the Treasury can then turn around and take that bond and sell it to the Federal Reserve, which happens every day, and thereby tap into the basically limitless amount of money. So the two institutions are connected, but they have separate rules of what they can do. Notice that in both cases, the Treasury can only spend more than it takes in taxes if rich people or banks or big corporations decide to lend to it. And likewise, the Federal Reserve can only create money if a corporation or the U.S. Treasury comes to it and says, hey, I need more money, create it and put it in my account. So that the key player here is the financial sector of the United States, the corporate sector. And that's in order to make sure that the government does not do what the private corporate sector, particularly its banks and insurance companies, are comfortable with what it does. It's a wonderful story in which the pretense of democracy, the pretense of a government representing all of us, is exposed to be a government very closely monitored and controlled and limited by the corporate sector, particularly the banking part.
So $7 trillion is about a third of our GDP. Is it true that in the last year the Fed has created out of thin air $7 trillion and used much or all of that money to buy corporate bonds and stocks in the market, or is that an exaggeration?
That's a bit of an exaggeration. It's probably only $3 or $4 trillion. But at these levels of magnitude, it really doesn't matter. What is true is that this year, the Federal Reserve, our central bank, has created more money than in any comparable time period in the history of the United States, and it's not even close. It's an explosion of credit to give every corner of corporate America, the banks, the insurance companies, and now corporations in general, the ability to get virtually limitless amounts of new money at interest rates barely above zero. This is capitalism on life support from the government. That's why you don't hear a peep these days from the libertarians, because their idea is completely evaporated. We are not separate from, we're not fighting the government. We have a capitalism that could not last a week without an endless provision of this kind of money, ultimately from the Federal Reserve. The barrier, the lines between private capitalism on the one hand and the government support for private capitalism, that line is now so fuzzy as to be basically evaporated.
Now, the argument that defenders of the Fed make is that in the 1930s, the late 20s and early 30s, when we slid into the Great Depression, the Fed actually maintained a tight money policy. They did not do what this Fed is doing right now. And had they done what the Fed is doing right now, had they just created a bunch of money and poured it into the stock market and corporate bonds, it would have lifted the stock market, it would have revived the economy, and we wouldn't have had, 15 years of worldwide disaster, essentially. Is that true?
No, I don't think so. And I think it's one of those hypotheticals that is used by people trying to defend an institution. There is something that the Great Depression did that, in my judgment, got us out of the Great Depression, that plus the war. And that is the government, the Treasury, really went to town to spend money. It created the Social Security system, giving every older American a check for the rest of their lives once they got to age 65. We'd never seen that before. They gave unemployment compensation federally, which we had never seen before. They created a minimum wage that required private employers to spend money they hadn't spent before, and then they had the federal jobs program. Notice, every one of those programs helped the people at the bottom, and we were able to get through that depression without a right-wing turn the way you had in Germany or Italy. So relying on the fiscal proved to be a way out for us, and it is only the conservative stranglehold on the American government that prevents us from using the successful activity the last time capitalism crashed to use it again now. Instead, by relying on the Federal Reserve, we are seeing inequality get much worse. During the Great Depression, inequality got much less in America. So we were better off as a society, certainly in terms of the mass of people, using the policies we call fiscal policy than the reliance on the monetary policy that we are doing this time.